Hey everyone, hope you're all good. Okay, so I got this comment on my older video, piecing the PCA. For those of you who don't know, this video just had a lot of music and some questions. The only reason that I'm not saying the name here is because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. So if you want, leave me a comment on this video with what you're called, and I'll say hi in the next video. I'm sorry about that. But the comment said that this presentation is hard to get anything from by just listening to it while I do chores. So, I'm not sure if this was intended as an insult or just a suggestion. I don't mind either way because I do think it's a good point. This video may not have been my best work. I was also quite shy. I'm still a bit shy, but less so. And I didn't want to come across as too confrontational in the things that I was trying to say here. So maybe not a good idea, but we learn. Some people did like it though. Uh, but this is going to be a really quick, chore friendly piecing the PCA video. It's like the doing chores edition. Okay, so the first point that I made here was why are some sentences in present tense? And I mean, firstly, does it even matter if there's present tense in a statement? Is it true that slipping into present tense in a statement is indicative of deception? So the textbook answer to this question is yes. I personally don't agree that it always means something, especially with a PCA like this where there's a lot of reference to video. So when they say things like can be seen, it's hard to say anything about that case of present tense because that video presently does still exist, and it can still be seen. And it's even possible that the writer of this PCA may have had that footage pulled up in front of them while they wrote that part of the PCA, right? So when it comes to stuff like that, I do think it's excusable, and I prefer to ignore that. But in this case, in my opinion, where it does start looking a little bit odd is where it relates to the phone. So the use of tense is fairly consistent. There's a few human errors, but it's mostly consistent until the topic of the phone is introduced. When the phone did and didn't report to things, it starts getting a little bit weird. Now, look, that could mean a couple of things. I will never commit to saying that it means something specifically, but what it is a change from the rest of the document in relation to a specific topic. Now, could it have been written on a different day? That's possible. Same person, different mood. Could it have been written by a different person? Of course, that's also possible. I mean, one person signed this document to say that they agree with what's in it, but that doesn't mean that they wrote the whole thing. I can't actually tell you what it means, but I can tell you that it's notable and that it should be kept in mind. Especially since, like I said, it seems to be triggered by a specific topic, namely the phone. Maybe also a little bit in terms of Bethany Funk seeing Ethan and Xana that night, but definitely in terms of the phone. And look, sometimes I'm really just pointing out things without being too sure what they mean because I like to keep an eye on them and they can pop up again later. So when it comes to the phone again, you can have somewhere in the back of your mind that there was a bit of a discrepancy in the wording of the PCA. Okay, so then I asked about the bathrooms in this PCA. So in this document, the bathrooms seem to be noted without a very clear reason. Like they're mentioned and then nothing. To me, that's not really clear why that would be because it's not like they're describing the layout of all the rooms in the entire house. But there is some need to mention both bathrooms. And I would be interested to know if there was something in the bathrooms. And Get a Clue's mentioned the drains. That's a really good point. It feels to me, and I could be wrong, but it feels to me like they wanted to say something about the bathrooms and then they reconsidered. Like there was something to say, but they didn't say it. I'm not sure if you agree. Let me know what you think. But I mean, it's similar to the originally, before Dylan Mortensen going to sleep in her room. Like, what came after that? Why is originally even there? Did she move around and then return? Originally implies that that was prior to some kind of change and movement. It does make you wonder if sentences were taken out. And look, that wouldn't really be the end of the world. It's up to them what they're going to include. But I think that it is interesting when it comes to the bathrooms. I'd love to know why they were mentioned at all, with little to no follow up on their relevance. Okay, so here I asked, did the suspect leave the house while a victim was still crying? So I'm not insisting that this happened or this is how it happened. Remember, even though I personally am training to be an investigator, that's not my role here on this channel. I like to think of myself as more of an analyst on here. So I don't really put out a lot of theories, but I like to look at the logic of things and pose questions. So that's what this question was. Um, I obviously don't actually know what happened, but I'd like to know more about the time frame of Dylan Mortensen getting from wherever she was in her room to the door, especially if there was some kind of a urgency in that she heard somebody crying. Um, if she heard the crying and arrived at the door on time for the figure to pass her by, I kind of wonder about the duration of that crying. So, did he have enough time to leave the room he was in and get to Dylan Mortensen's door among this crying? And had it stopped by the time he had gotten to Dylan Mortensen's door? Because crying to me is a continuous thing. They didn't say that she heard a cry. So that does seem like something that's ongoing. And what would that mean for this person's effectiveness as a killer if they went there with the intention to kill and possibly left a room while somebody was still crying? Possibly. Now, I emphasize possibly because maybe that isn't exactly how it happens, but it feels to me like it's a very short time span for her to hear the crying and then for him to pass her door. Of course, I don't know how Dylan Mortensen proceeds to her door. I'm just assuming that that shouldn't take her too long. Remember that they used the word walking. So this person who passed her by wasn't running. And I mean, I also kind of wonder if they've described the vehicle as leaving at a high rate of speed. Does that coincide well with somebody who was walking and not running? Look, there's a lot of factors around that. I mean, maybe he didn't want to trip and fall. I don't know. But he was not running, according to them. So that does take some time away from his journey. And I imagine that she could get to her door fairly quickly. Of course, they could have meant a cry. That could be a mistake. I'm not sure about that, but I think that it highlights a really important point. Because if we assume that Dylan Mortensen is giving an honest and accurate account here, and this all happened exactly so, that still doesn't make her a witness to the actual crime. People call her a witness. She is able to corroborate that a person left a room after she heard crying on a night when people died in the same house. Now, that's not a simple thing, okay? That is significant. But is there enough overlap between this person with the eyebrows and the true perpetrator for them to definitely be the same person? Because at this point, what he's done, from her perspective, is pass a door. Okay, how do they know exactly that he isn't an additional witness or just one of multiple attackers? They're not mentioning if there's something about him or something that he had on him or that he was holding or carrying or doing, particularly to make him and this perpetrator one and the same person. I'm not saying that his presence is insignificant if this account of Dylan Mortensen is true and accurate. But where is that overlap? Is it just on his place and time? Okay, so I have here when is later. And yes, they have used the word later prior to this, but it comes up a whole lot around the topic of the sheath. And this sheath is one of the most important things that they have to say for themselves, right? So I can't imagine why they would choose now to get super vague about the timing of how this was handled. Remember that this is the root of the entire IgG situation. Something that important should have a better and more concise foundation for me, especially when you look at how specific they can get on other things. I mean, in the beginning, they're giving exact dates for when they spoke to a person, but the sheath only gets a whole lot of laters. Multiple laters. We don't even know if those laters are the same later or if the next later is a later, if that makes sense. It is extremely vague. Okay, so I asked here, why is the dog mentioned? And some people really took this the wrong way. I love dogs. I have two of them, one really big and one really small. So, I mean, I'm probably one of those people who talk about my pets too much. Um, this was not me having a problem with the dog. Um, what I wanted to say was, I found it weird to mention the dog. And this shows, how much detail they can get into on some things, but not others. So the information on the dog is so specific, but why? What does the dog have to offer for probable cause compared to something like a sheath? It, I mean, it seems to be devoted quite a bit of attention in this PCA. I suspect, again, this is just my opinion, but it's more about finding a way to mention the ex boyfriend. But there's a bit of a reluctance to just mention him and say that he's been spoken to and a conclusion has been reached about this individual. It feels like they'd prefer to ease into the topic for some reason. I can't really say why that would be, but that is just the impression I'm getting from reading this, that the dog is being used as a bridge to the topic that they actually want to address. Okay, so when I asked what was happening in April, it wasn't literally about April. I mean, maybe, but what I was really getting at here is the starting point of this, and possibly from the perspective of the perpetrator, and how it was planned. They've used the word targeted a lot, but how does targeted intersect with planned? I know targeted can be spontaneous, but it can also be planned. So if this crime was pre planned, what kind of preparation went into this? And are there things that could look, in hindsight, like they were signs that this was going to happen? Um, people people sort of take the timeline that we're given, and the investigative timeline, in a sense, sort of starts with this vehicle. But is that the case? I mean, whoever did this most likely didn't get the idea there and then. How far back did this go in their minds, and what signs would there be of that? In hindsight, there might be things that indicate the the line of thought that this person or people went through, and I'd like to know if that's been looked at and understood. Okay, so that was my detailed explanation of piecing the PCA. I really do hope that that helps. And if you have any other comments, questions, observations, corrections, anything at all, please do let me know here or DM me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. And have a beautiful weekend. Bye.